Hey everybody, it's John Krask with EveryLibrary. The Library Institute is EveryLibrary Live. Halloween 2025. We're doing a little bit of Halloween reads. We're using any excuse right now to get together and spam book week wrapped up. And the censorship issues are not going away. All the things that are happening in America are not going away. And right now we need to spend some time just talking about good reads. Good, interesting, fun, terrifying, horrific, like complicated things to read, which is why I'm so very excited to have our guest today with us to talk about something that I've never said before out loud myself, why I love horror. I want to bring in Becky Spratford here. Becky is a longtime collaborator of EveryLibrary. 12 of these kinds of EveryLibraries. Yeah. Why keep track? Exactly. But Becky and I have never talked about her work before. The RA for all, reasons advisory for all, absolutely. But the horror side of things, you were my librarian here in Berwyn, Illinois, 60402 zip code for a while. You scare the crap out of me. The horror stuff does, and we've never talked about it. I've avoided it my whole life. So now with the introduction of your new book, this edited volume that Becky put together, I'm getting past my comfort zone and having you on today. Thank you.
I'm excited to do this.
100%. So let me read the official bio. As you know, I love the official bio. Becky Siegel Spratford, MLIS, is a librarian specializing in serving patrons ages 13 and up. She trains library staff all over the world on how to match books with readers through a horror review column for Library Journal. Known for her work with horror readers, Becky is the author of 3 textbooks for library workers, most recently, The Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror. She is on the Shirley Jackson Award Advisory Board and is a proud member of the Horror Writers Association, currently serving as the association secretary and co-chair of its library committee. She lives with her husband just outside of Chicago, where they raised their now adult children. Becky, it's a real pleasure to have you on this one today.
You know, I never did ask me for any advice about horror books, but I don't force it on people. No. I do think there is a horror book for every reader. So maybe at the end of this, I'll give you a suggestion.
Well, okay, so it's wide open, and I think that in the intro, Sadie Hartman says something that I think is very interesting to me. And she says, I think I love it, meaning horror, because horror doesn't flinch. It doesn't lie or sugarcoat or wrap the world in pretty packaging. It acknowledges the cracks in the veneer. It holds up a mirror to expose the messy, vulnerable parts we'd rather ignore, and in that, I've always, she said, feel seen. I think I'm a guy with wide eyes, you know, that I pay attention and all that kind of stuff, but I've avoided it. Like, what's up with me? That this thing is so active.
Well, also, let me tell you something with what you've been living through, you know, running EveryLibrary Institute, all this stuff with book banning. Horror might be a little bit of a solve, right? A salve for your real world horrors. That is one of the reasons, if you keep reading Sadie's fiction as a way to deal with the real horrors in the world. So I think you are the perfect person right now. You know, with what we're all going through, those of us who, you know, fight for intellectual freedom on a daily basis, you might need some horror to help you through it.
It's very interesting. The idea that horror is connects people through empathy, through catharsis as well, through the courage of those stories, and the connections in the face of what scares us the most. I mean, there's a really heavy emotional candor in this book. All the different 18 different contributors to it. That sense of being seen that Miss Hartman had in her opening. Why do you love horror?
Well, you know, I called the book "Why I Love Horror," and I always stay away for why I love it in the book because it's not about me. But why I love it is exactly what Sadie was saying, that it allows you to just look unflinchingly at the world, to come to terms with your real fear. I also love that it is made up things that can make me feel real emotions, like emotions I can actually feel in my body. And to me, as someone who loves reading and loves literature and loves talking about books, that's a triumph, I really think. And what I also love about horror is that it allows me to look at the world through a different lens. All speculative fiction does this, right? It pulls you out of what you're doing, and makes you look at everything around you with this supernatural or scientifically speculative lens. But its ultimate goal is to bring you back to where you are and to apply that to your real world. Because if you don't get pulled away a little bit, it's hard to really assess what's going on in your life. And so you can look at the problems, you can look at the troubling relationships, you can look at the dumpster fire that is the news with a different set of priorities, maybe able to attack it with your brain and not just your gut, which is really hard these days. It's also one of the reasons why, and I'm going to bring it back to EveryLibrary a little bit. When I had the chance to give the keynote speech at the Stoker Awards this last June, I got up there and with my 10 minutes, I basically yelled at the horror writers for not doing more to support intellectual freedom and challenged them all to go to a library board meeting and speak up, because they know true horror and they know writing and books, and to put those things together. And that's on YouTube, on the Stoker Awards page for the horror writers. I've put it on my blog. I've been talking about it all over the country, because I wish it wasn't happening, right? I wish the horror of us losing our intellectual freedom and the rise of horror weren't happening at the same time, but they are. And I think there's a reason. And people who read horror books and those who write them are some of our biggest allies, because they spend their days thinking about things that are even worse than what's going on in the real world.
There's something you said in one of the intros about horror being the most honest genre. And that stuck with me as I've been walking around. I mean, I used to think it was nonfiction.
Well, this is both, right? It's nonfiction and it's horror. No, I think you're right. I think that there are people who don't read fiction, and this is from my years of working at the library, that were like, I don't want to read fiction, it's not real. But there's a lot, and look, I love nonfiction too. I mean, I write nonfiction and I read tons of it, but there's a lot to be said for a really well put together horror novel that can tell you more about the real world than a nonfiction story. I'm looking over my shoulder at one of the best books of the year, which was on Barack Obama's list, The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. It is a historical fiction novel about the true horror of Manifest Destiny when you are a Native person, and that it's a horror novel. But then it adds a vampire lens as well. And that vampire lens is a story where this native vampire needs to, you are what you eat in this vampire world. So he starts by eating animals to stay alive. And then he eventually has to eat people to become a person still. Then he has to eat a native to stay native. But then he realizes the only way to stay himself is to eat his own people. Wow. And let's think about the horror of that. But it's also, right, a metaphor for everything there is about racism and what, people who are marginalized have to decide in order to make it in a white supremacy world. So it's got so much reality, and it's really tells you more about Manifest Destiny than a lot of books that are written.
That's very interesting. Do you find that there's some correlation between the renaissance that's happening in horror right now and the present moment? I mean, would we be experiencing a renaissance if it wasn't a difficult time in America right now?
I'm going to give you an answer that is yes and no, because I think that it's not that easy.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm asking you because you're the expert here. I've been thinking about that a lot on the way into this conversation.
I think it's helped, right? So we're going to go back to Dance Macabre, which is a book that came out in 1981, written by Stephen King. And it's a nonfiction socio-political look at horror. And obviously he was writing that right after all the tumult of the second half of the 1970s, right? And in it, he cites studies and many things about when times are tough, especially politically, that horror tends to have a little bit of a raise up in popularity. And so there is that, and that is definitely being seen now. But here's the other thing. And I've really been following horror very closely since the turn of this century. So right toward the beginning of the 21st century, the paperback mass market landscape for horror, which was really run by Leisure Books and Dorchester Publishing, the bottom fell out. They closed out of nowhere. That is what was supplying libraries with all those horror mass market paperbacks that weren't Stephen King. And it was hugely popular, just like mass market romances in libraries. And it just ended overnight. I allude to it in my acknowledgments when I talk about Brian Keene talking to me as a baby librarian when his whole world fell apart. He was one of their leading authors. I remember seeing him on CNN talking about this. This is what a big deal it was. And I reached out to him, and we become friends since. But watching this and then watching it build back up. So the bottom fell out. And so what happened was there was really no market for a while. And then there was the self-publishing market. So some new voices started to emerge. But what really happened was that that generation that Brian Keene was like the beginning of worked really hard to keep the group together, to keep the community together, to help promote each other. And most importantly, a lot of those people became teachers, right, of horror writing to help supplement their income. So people in my book, like Mary Sangiovanni, Stephen Graham Jones is a professor at Colorado. Victor LaValle is at Columbia. Tananarive Due is at UCLA. This is just some of them, right? They all started teaching. So now we got all these new voices, these young people who are going to get their MFA and they're allowed to write in horror. Then we also started letting, because some of these people are marginalized themselves, Stephen Graham Jones, Tananarive Due, Victor LaValle, great examples. They were writing their stories. They were getting them out. They were starting to sell, so then new voices. So what we have is this huge influx of new young voices, especially people from marginalized communities. And what I love about the horror that is coming out is it's not just the straight white boy stories of Stephen King, which quite honestly did not appeal to me as a kid in the 80s and 90s. There's nothing there for a girl in those stories. But instead we get all these new voices, and then there's people who've been craving horror, right? Who had to get it underground and search for it. Now it's back in the library, so it's easier to find. And when you're writing from a marginalized perspective, it adds a new lens to the horror, right? You've got the horror we've read before. Take one book everyone knows, Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, right? It's a book that redid the Gothic from a non-Western viewpoint. There's a huge influx of those right now. In fact, in my library journal genre preview in July, I talked about the Gothic is huge right now. And it's all the Gothic being told not from that Western white perspective. It adds a whole nother level of fear. And people find it, extra tantalizing. They find it extra scary. It makes it more real, back to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
It just all came together. So now really, though, and Brian Keene and I've talked about this many times, without those books in the library, we're not finding new readers and it can't grow. So it bottomed out, except for Stephen King, Anne Rice, Dean Koontz, Peter Straub, really. And now that they're back coming in the library again, we can have this renaissance, which leads to publishers publishing more, and so on and so on.
So the inspiration, your career has an origin story around, horror in it, and your expertise in it. The question, around why now, though, the arc of the anthology, you have Brian Keene opening it, you've got Stephen Graham Jones closing it. There's an emotional journey across all of it. And I just want to say to our watchers and listeners today that Becky did something that I think is really brilliant when it comes to how a contributed anthology like this. A lot of the time you'll see one essay from the editor, and this is a very good essay that Becky did. But then she also will make a commentary at the opening of each of the other essays. That's almost like a reader's advisory, like you're standing there at the desk. Hey, Becky, what should I read next? I thought that was brilliant, Becky, and it keeps you in it also in a way that a lot of times the editors sort of disappear from edited anthologies. Not to go down that too much of a rabbit hole. The journey of the book, the emotional and intellectual journey, you set up some bookends there with Brian Keene and Stephen Graham Jones.
Yeah, and so I think, though, that all of that, the emotional journey and getting myself involved, is all actually interconnected. I don't think it's a rabbit hole. When this whole entire idea started on the internet, I like to say it's all good things, not really start in the world, right, on the internet, but this is one that is, right? Because it started as a way to teach librarians who were nervous about horror, why people who write it love it. And so I did that for so many years. I'm actually doing it right now for the entire month of October still. I do it every year. And over time, by interviewing people and reviewing and doing this, I've met so many of these authors, and telling their story is part of my story, right? I've taught librarians and become the go-to person for readers advisory in general and horror specifically by sharing the stories of why people love horror. And so when I reached out to everyone and I gave them a longer word count, I kept that same no guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
Give me 2,000 to 4,000 words on why you love horror and stop. And and I waited for them to come back, right? And then what I saw was an emotional journey that I knew I was a part of as well. And so I'm looking to the side here because I have a poster of the cover of The Haunting of Hill House, and it's on canvas. And when I was doing the mixtape that is this book, once I had all the essays, which was about a year ago at this time, was when I was starting to put them into order and finishing the editing. I had little Post-it notes for each essay. I knew I wanted Brian first, and then I had told Stephen I'd love him to be last, so he something that's very good for last. And then everyone else, I waited to see what they gave me.
Yeah, yeah.
And it came in buckets, right? Some are about their childhood, some are about specific traumas. Josh Mallerman takes us on a train journey. David Demchuk tells us a story reminiscent of the ones he's heard. And Paul Tremblay has drawings with his daughter. Like, one of the most moving things that came out of this book is the day he texted me, Becky, Emma, his daughter, who's in college, and I got asked to be on WBUR Boston to talk about why we love horror.
Yes.
This book, and then I brought them together even more.
I didn't dog ear the photo, the page with the drawings, but it was the only drawings in the book, and I jump scared, Yeah, seriously, I wasn't expecting a drawing.
That picture or something else.
Here we go, absolutely, right here.
Oh yeah, that one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Emma did those, and it was a way for them to not only does Paul love horror, and do millions of readers love Paul, who's a New York Times bestselling author now in adult and middle grade, but his daughter and him, it's what brought them together. And he's written about it before in some of his, in some essays he's done and some newspaper interviews, but he's never gotten the chance to live it. And that, you can't take the personal journey of all of us together out of the book, but putting it together like a mixtape and making sure I let each author shine, but take the reader through the book very, consciously, was really important to me.
So, the contributors that you have here, they're across a couple of different. I mean, you didn't throw a dart at the wall. And
no, I didn't.
Different genre traditions as writers.
Well, no, they're all horror authors, but they all write differently. Right.
Yeah.
That was conscious. Yes. So I wanted to make sure I had important writers and not just the biggest names, that I had people that I felt like represented. I was very clear. It's half men, half women, different identities are represented, whether or not they write about that, they are there and represented. And very important to me that they all write different types of horror. So different scare levels. Some of them are more literary than others. And the idea was that I truly believe there's a horror book for every reader, as I said at the beginning.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to meet the reader where they were, right? That's what we do in libraries. We meet people where they are. That's what we learn to do. That's what I do every day, in the public library. And that's what I want to do with this book. So, if you are new to horror, you'll find an author here who's a really good way for you to get in. If you're a fan, you might find a new author you didn't know about. And they all showcase how they write, even though some of them are like, well, I don't write nonfiction. I'm like, your voice is there, though, your voice from fiction. And knowing their voices and having read multiple books by every person in this, and knowing that they were good people, because I was putting my name behind this.
Yeah.
So I needed to make sure that I trusted them as humans. It worked out perfectly, but you're right. I had to consciously, this was not invitation, or this was invitation only, right? This was not, hey, open call, put your stuff in. Yeah.
That's interesting. So did you, as you were going through editing this and making your mixtape, as you're saying, did you find yourself confronting or re-engaging your relationship with horror yourself personally?
Oh, Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
There were things, here's a great example. So John Langan's essay, and John Langan is your favorite horror author's favorite horror author. He's
Interesting.
famous among horror authors. He teaches at SUNY, I think Purchase, but one of the SUNYs.
Hmm.
He's just known, The Fisherman is that book from this century that a lot of people are like, if you read nothing else, read The Fisherman.
Hmm.
So John Langan's essay is a great example, because I forgot about a lot of my childhood fears. He's a couple years older than me, but they're similar. Like being a total Gen Xer, we were all afraid of quicksand.
Oh
We
my
didn't
God.
know why. But yeah,
Yeah.
I was like, oh,
The Bermuda Triangle existed back then. I don't know where it went. Yeah.
quicksand was like a thing in our lives.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten how ubiquitous that was. So there's an example of something funny, right?
Hmm.
But I think that Josh Mallerman's story about having to defend horror wherever he goes, right? He tells a story on a train about defending the genre to a literary person on the train. And I don't know if that actual train ride happened, but I know that that conversation has happened many times because I've had them. I've had them on planes. I've had them in airports. I've had them at cocktail parties. That having to like defend ourselves, I hate that about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I hope this book stops. But I hate that I have to defend horror. That really brought me back. And then, like another funny one, I've had a fractured skull. Clay McLeod Chapman has had 3 fractured skull. His skull, one skull fractured 3 times.
Wow.
That brought a lot back to me when that happened to me. And just little things like that. I kept seeing little things about myself.
Mm-hmm.
Light Yogurt and Rachel Harrison talking about women and the horror of the commercials we had to watch, and
Mm-hmm.
just lots of little things.
Yeah, that's interesting because when you approach these essays as a reader, I was wondering if it should be more of an unpacking of the genre. Like, okay, here's why we use zombies. Here's why we use vampires. Here, that's different. The AI's the new horror. But no, these reflections were very personal, and the connections. I mean, even the conversations about monsters that were both the internal monster and the external monster. This is a really interesting group of writers here you pulled together.
Well, thank you. One of the best things I heard was from a friend who came to my book launch because they love me, not because they love horror. And he said to me, Becky, these are all really good writers. And I was like, yeah, they are. These are not, just because they write horror. Many of these people are not just bestsellers, but they've won major prizes, not just horror prizes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's really important to remember. And that's what I hope showcases, that their love goes out there and brings in new readers. Or we're also hearing back, because I had a high school librarian read this to make sure it was okay for high schools. And one of the reasons we kept it in paperback was so that high schools could add it in curriculum. There are classes that are planning to teach some of these essays in the coming semester.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is, and I just actually visited a high school in Connecticut to talk about it, where they were all assigned Rachel Harrison's essay, actually. And we were talking about using somebody talking about their love of a genre to think about what they love in their lives. And they were asking them to do it in like a media, like TV, movies, music, books. And they're all going to write a personal essay to try to think about why they love something, which is great writing exercise for students.
It's interesting. The Simon Schuster, I don't usually think of as a textbook publisher. And this is not a textbook, but the utilization of it. Also, this is not a book just for librarians. You've written this for readers from all different backgrounds. As you said, folks who might be new to the genre, who might be real aficionados and fans of some of the folks who are in here. The horror's always been mainstream, even though it's been hard to talk about. Those conversations on airplanes and things like that. Where do you think horror is going for the new generation? I mean, is it continuing to explore different subs? Is it continuing to explore new writers, or are we seeing something evolve as we move into this? I mean, we're alone on the internet. We're alone together a lot of the time.
Yeah. I actually just finished a book that's coming out in 2026 that I'm writing a review of that's about that. And Paul Tremblay's new book is about the horror of AI that's coming out in the summer of 2026. So here's what I think. First of all, I mentioned this already, but the retelling, not just Gothics, but retellings of classic horror tropes and stories from new voices. So people who were formerly left out of the conversation, especially from identities all over the world, right? That is such a fresh, fertile ground, because what you find are these monsters and stories exist outside of British and American literature. Shocking, I know, right? But this idea that we can bring these monsters in from other parts of the world. In my book, Nunzo Ono, who's Nigerian British, is a great example of that. Her brand new book, Futility, came out this month. And it's a great story of female rage set in Nigeria. So, and she does a great job with that in all her books. And Sylvia Romero Garcia this year had The Bewitching, which is a book that came out in June of 2025. And literally, I mean, it does it not literally, it does it in a way to make you think about it, but tells a story about witches from Mexican culture and witches from the New England culture that we know, and shows how similar they really are in a way that isn't, that sounds didactic. It does it very naturally. So this idea of bringing other stories and cultures into the larger American and British English speaking audience is really key. More science fiction horror. First we had space horror. The last couple of years got really popular. And now, yes, we're seeing internet and AI horror, you know, Philip K. Dick, but make it even more horrific, right? I think we're seeing that as well. And, you know, there's so many ideas, like the idea that there's so many people getting MFAs with horror as their focus. I cannot wait. There's been a couple books that come out the last year, literally, that were people's MFA theses. Some of the more popular ones was one called Bad Cree by Jessica Johns, was literally her MFA thesis. And there's been a few others. Sacrificial Animals by a woman named, I think it was Kylie Peterson. But like, that is exciting.
Yeah.
Like, people are getting their MFAs. It used to just be, you know, literary fiction, but now we're getting master's degree level novels from people who previously were told they couldn't write about that.
So, Becky, I love talking to you for a couple of reasons. One is you're a good talker. The other is that you know what you're talking about. Okay. And there's two kinds of conversations to have with somebody who's an expert like yourself. One is the deep dive. And I want if everybody's watching here to know how to continue to have that conversation with you. That's the deep dive, you know. The other is I want to end with the cocktail party conversation. A little bit more, you know, easy, you know, perhaps for me as the person sitting across from you with the cocktail. Where do people find more from you? Yes, this book, Why I Love Horror, Simon Schuster, it's out now. But to kind of hang out with you and learn more about all these folks you're talking about.
Yeah, sure. So the easiest way is to just type RA for All into any Google search engine.
And we'll be put in the chat.
Yep. And I have the RA for All horror is the side one, but I review horror all the time. And you can just find me on Goodreads with all my reviews. It's a great way to know what's coming out in horror, and they go back, right? So you can take a look and see. I've been doing this regularly since 2015, but I talk about it all the time on both of the blogs. I present all over the place, but more recently I've been appearing at different libraries. So if you live in Seattle, I'll be at the Seattle Public Library with Sadie Hartman on November 6th. That'll be exciting. And I have a few more places I'm going to be in 2026 that will be announced soon. That's I know great. 3 already. But really, talk to me, and then I'm on Blue Sky as well, so we can interact with me.
Okay, so we're at the cocktail party. You know, our other friend and EveryLibrary live host, Gigi Howard, with Drinks in the Library. You know, we're at the cocktail party, Becky, and I get back to the original statement, like, oh, Becky, I don't know, man, horror. You know, it was never my thing. You know, I always avoided it. Like, what's a person like me going to hear from you about where should I start?
Yes, and that's a great question. So for you, it's not that hard because you live in the Chicago area. Yeah. And so I know you also like history of Chicago area. I know I would ask questions like, well, what's your favorite horror movie? What are the other interests you have? But we'll fast forward here because I know you. Sure, so you should start with Forgotten Sisters by Cynthia Pelayo, or really any book by Cynthia Pelayo, but Forgotten Sisters. Okay. All of her books are horror and sort of crime together, but they're really steeped in Chicago history.
Right, okay.
Forgotten Sisters is about the Eastland disaster.
Oh,
So
okay.
every time you visit the Clark Street Bridge now in Chicago, you can't not think of her book.
Oh, I mean, as we mentioned before at the beginning, and by the way, I want to thank you for putting the Berwyn Public Library, our library, at the time, in the first page of the first words says Berwyn Public Library, Cicero, Berwyn, that whole part of Chicago, that history is.
East Lynn disaster.
You are a very good reader's advisory person, Becky. Thank you very much. That actually means I can't tell you you're wrong because you're right about all of it so far. That's really cool. That's like magic. That's not even horror. That's magic.
I mean, it's what I do. I've done it since the turn of the century. 25 years of practice really helps.
That's perfect. Becky Spratford, you are a wonderful person to be with me today here on EveryLibrary Live. I've learned a lot about my comfort zone because of this interview. And also, I think that folks who are looking to have a conversation that's either new or renewed with these essayists and the genre are going to really love reading Why I Love Horror, your collected essay work from Simon Schuster. Anything closing for me, Becky?
No, just, give it a try. I think there's a horror book for everyone, and it's the perfect season.
It is the perfect season. Thanks for being part of Halloween 2025 with us. I'll see you in the green room.
Yep, see you soon.
Bye.
Bye.